Okay, welcome back, Peter, to
Yeah, good to
episode
be
number
back.
30.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, as usual, I'm glad we keeping it going.
yeah, it is. I mean, it's actually funny when you say those numbers, and then to me, then that translates to 24 is 2 years, and then that's like 2 years and 6 months. But then I'm sure
Yeah.
there's been months that we've skipped, 1 or 2 months that we've skipped. So yeah,
I
it's quite
wonder,
interesting.
have we skipped months? I don't know
Yeah,
how we
I
got.
think
I know that there was a December at some point that
there
we
was a
skipped.
there was a December for sure. I think I know we have skipped one.
Yeah.
Um,
That was more like a break than a skip.
Yeah. So, but then it means that, but then that leaves because we started in Jan, if I'm not mistaken. Our first one was that in Jan or in Feb?
I think it
Our
was
first
Jan,
ever
yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that means if you look at
What
it
was it,
that
Jan
way, then
2023? It
no, no.
must have been because
Yeah, yeah,
25,
23. Yes, 23. Yeah,
24, 23.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, then that's like July, August. This is technically the August one.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we've
So
fallen
yeah.
behind a couple days every time now.
Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, I just got sidetracked there.
No, that's cool. Okay, so today's book is, or last month's book, which we totally didn't cram yesterday. 90% of the book, both of us. Um,
Yeah.
the book is The Courage to be Disliked by, and I'm gonna try, but I'm gonna fail. Fumitake Koga and Ichiro Kishimi. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I butchered those, but it is what it is.
Okay, now.
And the book summary. Do you want to try it?
No, no, please.
um, yeah. So the courage to be disliked is written as a Greek-style dialogue between a young man and a philosopher. The young man, dissatisfied with life, went to the philosopher to learn how or even if he could ever be happy. Over the course of 5 nights, the philosopher walks the young man through the philosophy of Alfred Adler, a present future goal orientated philosophy referred to as teleology, and contrasts it with Sigmund Freud's philosophy, which he says is a past oriented philosophy referred to as aetiology. So, yeah, um, that's the overview of the book, and I think it touches on the core parts of it. The main thing that this book does is it goes through Alfred Adler's philosophy called Adlerism. What's it? Adlerianism. I
Yeah.
never remember how to pronounce it. Um, and and yeah, and what that philosophy is all about and how to think about it, and contrasting it with Freud's philosophy, because Freud's philosophy, and I don't really know that much about Freud's philosophy. Obviously, you hear it thrown around all the time, but I have never studied it in depth, which is why I also put there. He says is a past-oriented philosophy because I don't know. Maybe that's not true. It seems to be true from reading through the book, but yeah, it could be a bias. Um, but I think it's fairly dominant in current culture to look back and say, "Oh, this happened, and therefore that's the way that someone is like. That's why someone is like, or is the way that they are currently."
Mm.
Um, and it seems like Adler would say something along the lines of, "No, that's basically just an excuse. You're in
Yeah.
control. Stop it." So yeah, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts there before we dig in.
No, no, no. Yeah, just I think that the contrast um between the two being like you just mentioned in the end here of he's that, therefore this is why, and or it is what it is because of my internal struggles, essentially, like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that was quite interesting. Yeah, I think what I mean, getting into something that was said, it was the whole thing on education versus success part, where he is he's not educated, therefore he can't be successful. And him said like,
Mm.
no, that's actually an excuse. And I mean, I think we in a world where things are framed that way, but then like having read through it, I'm like, okay, that's actually quite true. That I mean, he did look at it as what is it, the inferiority complex and the superiority
Mm.
complex. How also those are closely related. That I think that was also a very interesting section when I was reading. But yeah, just seeing that that one thing is not really a means to an end. It's up to you to then change. And I think that goes back to, I'm trying to think of a book we did recently as well, where we kind of had quite a bit of a discussion about being in control, where you
Mm.
are responsible for your own happiness, your reaction towards things. And I think this is at another level similar to that, because it's more just because you're uneducated, your task is to then level up to then make something of yourself, essentially, you know. But yeah, just wanted to add that. But yeah, I'm sure we'll touch on it
Yeah.
more.
All right. Let's dig into the first night. So it's, as we mentioned earlier, it's split up into 5 nights, and the first night is titled "Deny Trauma," um, which I think is, yeah, it's quite an interesting viewpoint. So I'm gonna do what we've been doing lately, which is I'm just gonna read lots of little snippets and then we'll discuss those. So starting on page 7, the philosopher says, so you're saying there were incidents in your friend's past that became the cause of trauma. The youth says, of course. Before an effect, there's a cause. There's nothing mysterious about that. And then on page 9, so in Adlerian philosophy or psychology, we do not think about past causes, but rather present goals. Think about it this way. Your friend had the goal of not going out beforehand, and he had been manufacturing the state of anxiety and fear as a means to achieve the goal. In Adlerian philosophy, this is called teleology. So, just a little bit of background. There's this youth, and they talk about different things, but one of the things that he talks about is his friend, and his friend struggling with, I think it's like going outside or something like that. And
The recluse.
then, yeah, and he's the normal viewpoint, which is the viewpoint I still probably more hold on to than the Adlerian viewpoint, is the viewpoint of like he had these past traumas and therefore he's acting like this. And then the Adlerian viewpoint seemingly switches completely to the other side, which is like, no, we have to deny that entirely and focus on what the goal is. And then it's kind of shifting the onus onto you rather, which, yeah, I think we'll probably discuss it a little bit more throughout the book. But I think for me, it's one of the main takeaways is, even though I'm not fully convinced yet by the Adlerian viewpoint, I think I was too much on, as the book would say, the Freudian viewpoint of like cause and effect, like basically looking at the past and making excuses based on that is the harsh way of putting it. And then whereas the Adlerian viewpoint is like, no, that the past stuff need to deny all of that. Let's focus on what is the goal of what the person is trying to achieve. Okay, and that is called teleology. Then on page 10, this is the difference between aetiology, the study of causation, and teleology, the study of a purpose-given phenomenon rather than its cause. Everything you have been telling me is based on aetiology. As long as we stay in aetiology, we will not be able to take a single step forward. So just to repeat, aetiology is the Freudian view, the cause view. Then jumping from that to page 12, so it says here, but Adler, in denial of the trauma argument, states the following: no experience is in itself a cause of our success or failure. We do not suffer from the shock of our experiences, the so-called trauma, but instead we make out of them whatever suits our purposes. We are not determined by our experiences, but the meaning we give them is self-determining. The focus on the point Adler is making here, when he refers to the self being determined not by our experiences themselves, but by the meaning we give them. He is not saying that the experience of a horrible calamity or abuse during childhood or other such incidents have no influence on forming a personality. Their influences are strong. But the important thing is that nothing is actually determined by those influences. We determine our own lives according to the meaning we give those past experiences. Your life is not something that one gives to you, but something that you choose for yourself, and you are the one who decides how to live. Then jumping to page 21, it says here, people are not driven people are not driven by past causes, but move towards goals that they themselves set. That was the philosopher's claim. The teleology he espoused was an idea that overturned the root of causality of respectable psychology. The young man found that impossible to accept. And then going to page 26. To quote Adler, the important thing is not what one is born with, but what use one makes of that equipment. Yeah. And then separately from that, looking at so that was sort of talking about the denial of trauma, and then he shifts to looking at this phrase in Adlerian philosophy called lifestyle, and that he starts off describing that on page 30. In Adlerian psychology, we describe personality and disposition with the word lifestyle. Then page 31. Lifestyle is thought of as something that you choose for yourself. 32. If lifestyle is not something if your lifestyle is not something that you were naturally born with, but something you choose for yourself, then it must be possible to choose over again. And then the youth says to him, there's no way that one can just change on the spot. And then the philosopher replies, yes, you can. People can change at any time, regardless of the environment that they're in. You're only unable to change because you are making the decision not to. So this is where it starts to get quite challenging. And then on page 34, simply put, people have various complaints about things, but it's easier and more secure to just be the way that one is. When we try to change our lifestyles, we put great courage to the test. There is the anxiety generated by change and disappointment attended to not changing. Adlerian psychology is a psychology of courage. One might say that you're lacking the courage to be happy. And then lastly, on 38. As Adler's teleology tells us, no matter what has occurred in your life up to this point, it should not have bearing at all on how you live from now on. That you living in the here and now are the one who determines your life. Yeah, so that's the denying of trauma idea. I don't know. What do you think, Peter?
I don't know if it's because of I want to say season I'm in, maybe that. Yeah, like you're saying, when you go to that part, that's more of a struggle. But to me, I don't know why, but it made sense. Some
Okay.
of the things that he raised, to be, I mean, for instance, when he entered the lifestyle section of what you're reading, there was a section where he was kind of saying how we we're so focused on people around us changing, right? But if you look at it in the sense of, again, I think this is something we've covered in many instances and many cases of where like people only change when it best suits them. I think there have been a few books that we've read where the only motive to change is when you kind of see the benefit of it. And essentially, that's, if you look at it further down the book, it speaks about how you get those individuals where they look at life as, if I do something for you, what is that person going to do back for me? There's also that whole
Yeah.
link. But then in this section, it kind of says that forget about the people around you. You change. And the moment you change, you attract a different set of people that probably also like same thing. And then you have new people essentially around you. It's the same as when you pick up a habit. Let's say you want to stop drinking, for instance. When you do that, there'll be certain people who maybe view that in a way where either it's a challenge or they feel as though you implying into them that drinking is a bad thing, stop drinking as well. But it's just you've made that personal choice and they will retract from you. Not all of them, but some will. But then in that you then attract people who have no issue with that. And it's like you have changed and so is the people around you based on the decision you've made to change. And then if we then go back to the first section about denying trauma, yes, I feel like it's the word in itself kind of makes trauma seem small, which I think that's not what he's trying to do. I think that's kind of where the initial pushback sort of comes from. But it's actually kind of essentially saying, we're not denying that this has happened, but what are you doing as a result of it? Not as a result of,
Yeah.
but how are you responding to it? It's like you can either, like his friend, I was mistreated by my parents, therefore, if I stay away from them, they don't have the ability to mistreat me anymore. And you also then view people in the same way that if I step up, people will mistreat you. Then you create this barrier to say, oh, if I actually stay and I know that will ever happen, which again is like perfectly normal. But then if you sort of challenge myself that, okay, this did happen, but it doesn't mean that life continues that way. I can still go out and,
Yeah.
trust that people won't actually mistreat me, because then it's like you're putting everyone in a box, and it goes back to also what the young man says, what he struggles with, to be like, he struggles with, because of self-confidence, he thinks that people see him a certain way, and as a result, he won't speak up to speak. And I mean, reading that, I was like, okay, I feel like I've experienced that, but at the end of the day, it's actually, I mean, it took some time to read. There's actually like a self-centeredness, there's a pride level to that as well. You actually sort of pride to be like, no, I have this, but I actually can't tell. You frame it in the way that, oh, people will laugh at me if I say something, but it's actually like, in essence, that's a you thing, not a people thing. You've just boxed everyone to say this is how they're going to react to you, but in essence, you're actually not giving people the opportunity to, act the way they feel exactly towards you. So, yeah, it's yes, again, it's a very tricky one in the sense that, and again, also in the time we are to sort of be like, how we prioritize, let's say, or how people advocate for mental health, and also so it's more of, you need to, also need to phrase this correctly, but it's more of, it's the cause and effect is what's been driven, to be like, oh, someone is feeling this way. How? Why is it that they feel this way? And it's like all about unpacking the why, or people really focus on why the person ended up there, but never about, so what are we going to do about it? It's always identifying like
Yeah.
this is where these people are, but it's like that's all good and well, but it's like, what is then the next step? And again, he even, a section in the book, I forgot which part it is, forgive me for that, but it was how he was saying, oh, I actually remember about when he introduced the intervening part, about people intervening in other people's lives. It's in the sense of, if you go for counseling, they're actually not allowed to intervene. They can just equip you with tools that will help you, but they're not supposed to be like, okay, for you to get out of this, right, do this, do this, do. There's no sort of prescribed method to be like, if someone comes with this trauma, this is how we're going to treat it. And that's that
I think, I
going
don't know
back.
if he was saying, maybe he was saying that, but I got more the sense that he was saying, like, we can try and equip people and help them, but it's up to
Yeah,
them to actually enact that. We can give them advice and we can assist them and be there for them and encourage
yeah.
them is the word that's often used.
So yeah, but
Um,
that's why I'm saying
but
the wording I use is, but then you can't say you have to do that, that, and that.
yeah, I think he wouldn't go
Y-
that far, but I
yeah,
don't even know if that would be against the Adlerian philosophy to just be like, I have a strong recommendation that this is the thing that you should do, and then that's the next thing, and that's the next thing. It's more about the idea of like you trying to actually do it for the other person. But maybe we should pause on that and leave it for
yeah,
later. We
for
will get
there,
there.
but we'll get there. But
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, just to get back to it. But yeah, I was just saying that, yeah, it's I do not. It's not that far fetched for me to understand what he was trying to say, but at the same time, not
Mm.
trying to make less of what trauma or what sort of traumatic experiences people have been through.
I think that's I the last part of what you said there is kind of where why I say I don't think I get it and I'm fully on the
Mm,
same page as him because I think what you said is what I agree with. Like I feel like because you said we can't deny the past trauma that and he's saying no, no, you have to deny it kind of completely and I maybe over time I'll come to understand or maybe I just don't fundamentally agree but I the to me it seems like we need to accept that past traumas have happened and try to understand those. But then, like you were saying, we often don't then take the next step to say, okay, what can be done about it? We just like, oh, that's the way that someone is because of the past traumas, and that's just the way that they will be. But to be like, okay, that happened, unfortunately or fortunately, and now what is the step forward? So I almost want to like combine the two, rather than just saying, oh, just focus on the
The
future
one.
part, because I don't think you can, um without understanding things that happened, I think you can end up doing things where you're like, why does this person constantly act this way, or why do I constantly act this way? And it's related to something that happened in the past. So if we just turn a complete blind eye to it, then it's not going to be helpful. And that's probably not what Adlerian philosophy is saying, but that's how it comes across initially here, to me at least. And so that's where I'm like, I fully agree that there's use, and it's you need to take that part into account, the future goal oriented, are we going to move forward
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I,
But
I think, and yeah, just to hop onto that point you made, I think it's more so when I mean, in his framing, it's more so when I want to say people are then paralyzed to do anything because of a past experience. I think that's what he's actually tagging at, to be like, then you're just making an excuse. You know, I think that was the essence of it all, to be like, just because, and sorry, this was sorry, just because that happened, it doesn't mean you can't do that anymore. I think that's more what he's getting at, to be like, you can't say, just because I've experienced it, then I choose this life to never go out again, and like you
yeah,
block
yeah,
any opportunities that come your way. I think that's fundamentally what he's trying to, the pattern that
yeah,
it's trying to break at, but in so doing, like, it's kind of the harsh reality of it is like, deny your trauma. you know
yeah,
and which, again, strange enough, there's a section where he was saying he doesn't deny that past experiences
yeah. Have had an effect.
effect on who you are. Like, those two are
Yeah,
contradicting experience, because a trauma is an
yeah,
unfortunate experience. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a way of mentally framing to be more focused on the moving forward part rather than getting just absorbed in the past completely. So, and if that is the case, then I'm like, yeah, cool. I think I get it, despite the phrasing of things.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm misunderstanding how it's working. But yeah, let's move on to the second night. Otherwise, we won't make it in time for cutoff. So, the second night, all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. So
I
let's
think,
jump.
just before you jump in, I'm
Go
still
for it.
struggling with what that means as a whole.
Okay. Well, let's read through some things and then chat through it, because to me, this part was the intuitive part.
Yeah, no, no, it is. But I'm just, when that term comes about and the way he uses everything around it, and I'm just like, what is that? But again,
Yeah,
yeah, we can get into it.
it is. Yeah, there are lots of things in the book that's quite challenging to understand. I think I'll need to like reread it again at some point.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so uh, going from page 49, um, he says here. It's basically impossible not to get hurt in your relations with other people. When you enter into interpersonal relationships, it's inevitable that to a greater or a lesser extent, you will get hurt. And you will hurt someone too. Adler says to get rid of one's problems, all one can do is live in a universe all alone. but one can't do such a thing. Then on page 51, all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. And then he says this concept runs at the very root of Adlerian philosophy. So that's kind of talking about interpersonal relationship problems. And then he kind of gives this example on page 54, which I'll jump to. There was a time, until I was right around your age actually, when I was concerned about my height. Then page 55, my subjective feelings about height my feelings about my height were all subjective feelings of inferiority, which arose entirely through my comparing myself to others. That is to say, my interpersonal relationships. Because if there hadn't been anyone with whom to compare myself, I wouldn't have had the occasion to think I was short. Please understand that what you are feeling is not an objective inferiority, but a subjective feeling of inferiority. When, even with an issue like height, all is reduced to subjectivity. And then a bit further down, seeing it from my friend's point of view, that I can get people to relax or that I don't intimidate them because of my height, such aspects can become strong points. Of course, this is a subjective interpretation. However, there's one good thing about subjectivity. It allows for you to make your own choice. The choice to view my height as either an advantage or a disadvantage is left open to me. So yeah, that's the example that he gives. And then he goes and starts talking about the inferiority complex and a healthy feeling of inferiority. So I'll read a few snippets there. People enter the world as helpless beings. This is 58. People enter this world as helpless beings, and people have a universal desire to escape from that helpless state. Adler calls this the pursuit of superiority. Then in the next page, Adler is saying that the pursuit of superiority and the feeling of inferiority are not the disease, but stimulants to a normal and healthy striving for growth. If it is not used in the wrong way, the feeling of inferiority too can promote striving and growth. Then on page 61, there's nothing particularly wrong with the feeling of inferiority itself. You can understand this point now, right? As Adler says, the feeling of inferiority can be the trigger for the striving of growth. The inferiority complex, on the other hand, refers to a condition of having begun to use one's feeling of inferiority as a kind of excuse. And then on page 71, let me just jump there. He says, a healthy feeling of inferiority is not something that comes from comparing oneself to others, but from comparing oneself with one's ideal self. So yeah, he talks there about the inferiority complex and how essentially the feeling of inferiority is in a sense almost like a normal self-awareness, like I can improve, and then the inferiority complex is like a pathological focus on inferiority. It's kind of like the sentiment of I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'll never get there. So inferiority drives us forward. The inferiority complex is kind of like the point of accepting defeat. And then almost through the second night, the next part is just viewing people as comrades. So on page 78, he says, you think of interpersonal relationships as competition. You perceive other people's happiness as my defeat, and that is why you can't celebrate it. However, once it is released from the schema of competition, the need to triumph over someone disappears. Then next, now we come to the important part. When you are able to truly feel that people are my comrades, your way of looking at the world will change utterly. No longer will you think of the world as a perilous place or plagued by needless doubts. The world will appear before you as a safe and pleasant place, and your interpersonal relationship problems will decrease dramatically. And then lastly, and this part I think gets a little bit complicated, but it's not super complicated, but it kind of is at the same time. He talks about there's objectives in Adlerian philosophy. So there's objectives of behavior that are then supported by objectives of philosophy, and those those objectives are achieved by facing one's what he calls life tasks. So I'll just quickly run through those, and then we can chat through the chapters all. So on page 89. So why do you see other people as enemies? Why can't you think of them as your comrades? It is because you have lost your courage and you are running away from your life tasks. In Adlerian philosophy or psychology, clear objectives are laid out for human behavior and psychology. First, there are two objectives for behavior: to be self-reliant and to live in harmony with society. Then, the objectives for the psychology that supports these behaviors are the consciousness that I have the ability and the consciousness that people are my comrades. And then on page 91, the three life tasks that he puts down are the tasks of work, the tasks of friendship, and the tasks of love. Altogether, he calls these the life tasks. And then lastly, on page 100, he says, Adler indicated that the state of coming up with all manner of pretexts, in order to avoid life tasks is called the life lie. So, yeah, a lot of things there, but some of the core concepts, like we said, is the life tasks, so tasks in work, friendship, and love. And then if you use excuses to avoid those, that's the life lie. Yeah, and then obviously also the inferiority side of things as well. So all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, no, it's and I mean I did mention it in the intro. The inferiority complex section was one that sort of caught my attention. You know, to sort of be like how easy it is, and I read it and I didn't kind of put it in the words that you actually just did now about how the feeling of inferiority is it's kind of neat, like the healthy way of being like, oh, okay, I'm not good at this, but let me better myself. But then the problem comes in when, and again, and that's what the inferiority complex sort of is to say, because I'm not good at this, then let me rather not. And I mean, reading that, and I mean, to me, I know I personally have that struggle when it comes to like languages. I mean, I've been here, 15 or close to 15 years, and there isn't a local language that I've picked up. But it's that thing of where of the moment I try, like, oh, I'm not good at this, and let me not try, and I mean, we have read a book on languages to be like the only way you're able to pick up a new language is from those try and error. You have to. I'm not good at this. Then
you have
strive.
To speak to people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Force yourself to fail and sound silly.
Yes. But when with that inferiority complex, it's more of like I'm failing at this, thus I can't speak this
I
language,
can't do
and
it. There's no point.
I
Yeah.
can't do it. I mean, I can admit that's like one that's deeply ingrained with me, which I know I'm trying to fight again, but it's just,
It's the same with maths for a lot of people.
and it's so interesting how he said that's also then very closely related to the superiority complex, where people who overly think of themselves,
Mm,
to be like, and I mean, there is a mission to be like, it's so easy to go from that, but then have an area where you're actually not good at, but you convince yourself you're good at, and then,
yeah.
and he kind of said, and that was a very interesting part to be like, that comes from also a prideful place. To be like, you want people to see you excel. It becomes a
Yeah.
you thing. To be like, people need to see that I'm good at this. It's from that validation from other that sort of, boosts your ego to be like, and then
Mm,
comes there's to be like, yes, you want the praise for that, but in actual fact, you're actually not good at it.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I think for me that was one interesting view. The one thing I think it's in a later section, or it was in the first, the one that I think when I read, I actually had to sit down and go back and think about it to be like, that's actually, it could have been in the last one. If it is from the last bit, we'll connect it. But it was about how you actually voicing out your your bad experiences is actually like a form of seeking attention. I think it was in this
mm,
way it talks about seeking attention, where you do things as a way to seek attention. Like the reason why the person, I think it was in the trauma section, the reason why his friend was locking himself up in a room was as a way of seeking attention, because he felt in all the instances where he was being mistreated, he felt like he wasn't getting much attention from the parents. So as a result,
mm,
if I am reclusive, then people will think of me, will speak of me, will be like this, and that. The whole goal
mm,
orientation. And I felt that was quite interesting to be like, so often like, and again, that line is so small where, and going back to the inferiority complex of the superior, the line is so thin to be like the goal of you sharing your bad experiences isn't, for awareness, but rather to have then people feel sorry for you and all that. And naturally, we're in a world where that's condoned. No, I'm also not saying, but it's then people are then using that as a weapon to be like, oh, I'll
mm,
come up with, you know, how badly I feel just so that people treat me much better. But you're actually manipulating the situation. You're actually not, you know, helping others. You're doing that to serve your own good. So
yeah.
again, it's like you using your, and which goes to the story, you're using your downfall or your inability to do things or your shortcomings as a way to one up someone else, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, one of the things that stood out was okay, obviously the core idea of interpersonal relationship problems being
Mm.
the main thing for all problems. But just it seems like Adler's solution to a lot of the problems is to say, don't view someone as your enemy or
Oh, yes.
competition, view them as your comrade.
Yeah.
And I think it's a helpful framing of how to interact with people.
Mm.
and it ties into something we'll chat about later, which is like vertical relationships versus
Yes,
horizontal relationships.
horizontal relationships.
So like next to rather than above. So yeah, that because the idea of if we sort of play out a small view of it, the idea of saying you are my comrade means that I'm not trying to be like I'm better than you or you are better than me. So I'm not trying to be like, oh, I need to catch up to where Peter's at, and or oh, my life is terrible because I'm not like Peter, or thank goodness I'm not like Peter, I'm so much better than him.
Mm.
All of those cause issues and problems, both straining relationships and causing sort of societal issues, but also just like emotionally for me or for you, it's not a. Some might even say it's traumatic. um, so yeah, but it's. I'm glad you're laughing. uh, yeah. So, but I enjoyed that part, and then the
Yeah.
thing that I kind of wanna understand a bit better um, at some point, and just kind of re-go through it and see if I understand is that whole like the objectives idea, because he says the objectives for behavior is to be self-reliant, so not reliant on others, and to live in harmony with society. So it
Mm.
kind of touches on those things. And then the other part is the objectives for psychology, which is the consciousness that I have the ability and the consciousness that people are my comrades. So I think those two parts kind of make more sense to me. Like the comrades idea we've just spoken about. And then the I have the ability part is kind of the inferiority, the healthy inferiority thing. Obviously, you can get too much on the ego side of I'm best at everything, but
Mm.
I think he's saying um, when you realize that you are not, that you have some inferiority when it comes to something, like you aren't as good at, I don't know, tennis as you want to be or could be, then you realize that inferiority in a healthy way, and you can say, "Oh, I have the ability to change that." Whereas the inferiority complex, like we were saying, is more like, "Oh, it's impossible. I suck." It's yeah. So I think, but the point is that those things and the life tasks and stuff like that are still a bit hazy on, but some of it makes
Yeah.
sense.
I was gonna say, sorry, the penny dropped when you were speaking. The thing I was explaining before about people using the, I don't want to say trauma or the terrible experiences to one up was actually from the comrade and enemy
Okay.
section, and it was the whole thing of where, which was the other interesting thing to be like, you're close people you actually become very close to become your greatest enemies. I don't know if you remember that section of where, the people you tend to love the most are the ones when you have a fallout, kind of the ugliest one where you actually end up not
Yeah.
speaking, and which was again very true, because like in so instances where, I mean, for instance, if you look at divorce, they stem from a point where these people were at some point madly in love with each other, to
Hmm.
the point where, they can't even stand one another. But yeah, I don't know why, but I just sort of, that just, yeah, sparked something in me to be like, it is very true, to be like, sometimes we can use anything like for an objective. I mean, it spoke about how, for instance, I think this was actually from the part of being disliked, which I think is the next section, so I'll leave it for then. But just going back to what you're saying about the whole, I'll just handle the top section of being self-reliant and harmony in society. I think that's actually ties in with that community feeling that is introduced in the next chapter to be, or it's two chapters, to be like community is you and I. I think that was what the fundamental of a community was, but it's in that sense of where now I think the self-reliant can also be framed is that because you're part of the community, you are able to contribute to it, which I think where that reliance comes from. It's your contribution part of it. The self harmony, community harmony is like you people are now living in unison as a community because you identify with the same thing, that you actually feel like you're a contributing member of this society, and therefore you stay in
Yeah.
harmony. The moment at which, then which goes back, the moment at which you are deemed not reliable in this community, then you are shunned from it, which then breaks that that society harmony. I think that's just one way I sort of kind of tried to look at it, to be like, in that sense, to be like, for instance, let's say you have a church community, you contribute and serve into it and whatnot is, so essentially you are self-reliant to the thing that you can do those things on your own as part of that society. And as a result of this, you actually belong to this community and kind of you live in unison and in harmony, which then introduces the second part of that, which is the society harmony. So you're striving for being self-reliant and the society harmony part, yes. So yeah, that is just kind of, I don't know if that helps with that part, but maybe something that to me kind of was like, kind of helped me tie those things together.
Yeah, I think you have a better grasp of it than me, but I'll get there. I'll get there.
Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry.
Go. No, go for it.
No, I think the other thing I wanted to say was just, I mean, we didn't dive deep into them, but again, I think it introduces something that would be important, which is the life tasks and the life lies. To be like, everyone has a part to play, or certain tasks when it comes to work, when it comes to friendship, when it comes to love. You being able to acknowledge that, and again, it's when I think then the life lies comes when we then are denying what our tasks in those societies, or when you denying your task in those certain areas. That's when, like you said, the excuses sort of stem from. But yeah.
Interpersonal relational breakdowns.
Yeah.
Okay, so then going on to the third night. So this is, the overview is discard other people's tasks. Yeah, so I'll jump into it from 113. Let's talk about one of the major premises of Adlerian psychology regarding this matter. Adlerian psychology denies the need to seek recognition from others. Then on a little bit further down, there's no need to be recognized by others. Actually, one must not seek recognition. This point cannot be overstated. Then on page 115, this is commenting on reward-punishment education. If one takes the appropriate action, one receives praise. If one takes inappropriate action, one receives punishment. Adler is very critical of education by reward and punishment. It leads to mistaken lifestyles in which people think, if no one is going to praise me, I won't take appropriate action, and if no one is going to punish me, I'll engage in inappropriate actions. Then page 116. When one seeks recognition from others and concerns oneself only with how one is judged by others, in the end, one is living other people's lives. That kind of idea of judgment being related to recognition is one that comes up every now and again in this section, because he's basically saying, if you think that recognition is important, then you are also saying that someone having a judgment over another person is an important thing. And he's saying in Adlerian psychology, that's denied. Then 118, but do not behave without regard for others. To understand this, it is necessary to know about the idea in Adlerian psychology known as the separation of tasks. So yeah, basically don't seek recognition from others is what it's saying, but also don't disregard them completely. And those two seem contradictory. And so how do you handle that? And then he starts to dig into this idea of separation of tasks. And yeah, so I'll read a little bit of those snippets. So 120, Adlerian psychology, we consider it from the perspective of whose task is this? In general, all interpersonal relationship troubles are caused by intruding on other people's tasks or having one's own tasks intruded on. Carrying out the separation of tasks is enough to change one's interpersonal relationships dramatically. So basically that idea of saying this is something that I'm supposed to do versus something that you're supposed to do. And then I'm not going to read through it, but he uses the example of a child and a parent. It's the child's responsibility to grow and to do different things, and that's the task of the child. But the task of the parent is kind of to be there and support them and encourage them. It's not to do the work. So the example of studying, if I study for my child's exam, that's not my task. And so it's not going to be helpful to either of us, the child or the parent. Then on 123, in Adlerian psychology counseling, for instance, we do not think of the client's changing or not changing as the task of the counselor. That's something that I think you mentioned earlier. Naturally, one gives all assurance that one possibly can, but beyond that, one doesn't intrude. There's a saying that goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Please think of counseling and all other assistance provided to people in Adlerian psychology as having that kind of stance. Then on page 124, so the youth asks, the counselor doesn't change the client's life, and then the philosopher says, you are the only one who can change yourself. Then on 127, if you're leading a life of worry and suffering, which stems from interpersonal relationships, first learn the boundary of, from here on, that's not my task, and discard other people's tasks. That is the first step towards lightening the load and making life simpler. Then 129, all you can do with regard to your own life is choose the best path that you believe in. On the other hand, what kind of judgment other people pass on that choice is up to them. That is the task of other people. It is not a matter that you can do anything about. And then carries on, the youth asks what another person thinks of you, if they like you or dislike you, is that person's task, not mine. And then the philosopher says that is what separating tasks is all about. You are worried about being judged by other people. That is why you are constantly craving recognition from others. Now, why are you worried about other people looking at you anyway? Adlerian psychology has an easy answer. You haven't done the separation of tasks. And then to 131. You wanted some specific steps. First, one should ask, whose task is this? Then do the separation of tasks. and then do not intervene in other people's tasks or allow even a single person to intervene in one's own tasks. So that's kind of the separation of tasks idea. And then there's three little other snippets that I just want to read through. So page 134, the separation of tasks is not the final objective for interpersonal relationships. Rather, it is a gateway. For instance, when reading a book, if one brings one's face too close to it, one cannot see anything. In the same way, forming good interpersonal relationships requires a certain degree of distance. When that distance gets too small, people become stuck together. It becomes impossible to even speak to each other. One should be ready to lend a hand when needed, but not encroach on another person's territory. And then the last two, which is about freedom and being disliked, is on page 144. In short, that freedom is freedom is being disliked by other people. So it kind of rings back to the title of the book, The Courage to be Disliked, because often in Adlerian philosophy they talk about courage as well. And then he says here as well, it's that you're disliked by someone is proof that you're exercising freedom and living in freedom, and a sign that you're living in accordance with your own principles. And then lastly, page 146, not wanting to be disliked is probably my task, but whether or not someone so-and-so dislikes me is the other person's task. Even if there's a person who doesn't think of me well, I cannot intervene in that. To borrow the proverb I mentioned earlier, naturally, one would make effort to lead the horse to water, but whether he drinks or not is the person's task. The courage to be happy also includes the courage to be disliked. When you have gained that courage, your interpersonal relationships will at once change into things of lightness. So yeah, I think a lot of it to me makes sense, and there are some like challenging and harsh ways of phrasing things, but I think that's often the case in seemingly this book, or maybe it's just specifically Adlerian philosophy. It's kind of like going against the grain in a lot of ways, but a lot of ways that I think make sense. Yeah. So I'm still not 100% convinced that recognition is a completely bad thing, but I think it's kind of the way that you do the recognizing, because they frame it later as encouragement and things like that, rather than the vertical.
I think just to go back to that point, I think again it's a thing we spoke about in the beginning of how he isolates one thing where it's like maybe like a combination of others, because in here what he the interpretation I got was if your drive to do something is recognition, then kind of stop, take a step back, you know. So recognition in general, like you can, but if that's what you're doing, sorry, if you see from the exam, one of the, I think it was here where he made that example of what will you do if you are continuously picking litter and no one says anything? Then the guy was like, then I would stop.
Yeah.
You know, then it's like, okay, then that's the problem. Initially, you didn't do it out of the goodness of your heart, but rather you were doing it so that you are seen and someone you can. So I think that's the framing of it, in which he's trying to say recognition is bad if it becomes a goal of what you're doing. I mean, it's it's funny how, I know this is completely random. So we have on Sundays once a month men's fellowship at church, like after the service and stuff. So so I think what we were doing this past, so we've been doing a series. I think it's life struggles. I think 7 life struggles or something. I could be wrong, but last week's section was serving humbly, you know. So the minister was then telling us a story of how there was this committee where someone had applied to be president, or he was shortlisted for president, and then at the end of it, you sort of get a round of like very intensive questions for why you're doing something. You know, like you need to explain yourself, and like they kept digging at this guy, like, you know, on why he wanted this position, you know, and he would give the normal thing, like, no, I'm passionate about this and whatever. But then towards the end, or at the end of those things, he's like, the reason he actually wanted this position because he knew that that was or his dream was to always have this picture in the newspaper, and that would have given him the ability to do that. And it's exactly that. Is that I think we package things again when we lay into people in ways that I want to say is palatable, but at the core of it is like, again, the whole recognition thing. In essence,
Yeah.
you're doing something that's good, but it's like at the core of it, you just want someone to say, thank you for doing that, or recognize that you're doing that thing. And then that
I
keeps
think. Sorry, go for it.
yeah. No, no, go, go.
No, I think the thank you for doing that is something that in the Adlerian psychology
Yes,
thing, they're
yes,
like, that's
yes.
fine. But
Fine, yes.
the being like, um, basically like, oh, you are the best.
Yeah,
And
you are to an
basically,
exception at picking up litter, let's say.
yeah, I think it's whenever it comes to the recognition thing, I think the Adler seems to tie it very closely to judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether it's judgment of being good or judgment of being bad. And he's basically like, the idea of judgment isn't helpful. And
Yes.
so that's why don't do the recognition thing. And then the reason why the judgment is not helpful is because it basically ends up that you live your life on other people's,
Was
by
terms.
trying to, yeah, other people's terms. So you trying to be better than them, or you see them as better than you, and that's
Yeah.
just not healthy.
Yeah. No, I mean, when he said that, I mean, it took a while, but I was like, oh, actually, that's true. The whole thing of when you tell someone, good job, it's like, I do this job better, but your effort in this is good enough. And now, you know, it's like, I was like, wait a minute, you know, and I mean, to him, the youth was like, no, but that's a good way to do it. And I was like, initially I was with him, but when he got to that point, I'm like, and again, like you've said now, it's actually comes from judgment. You know, when you tell someone that it's not that, it's like, yeah, I'm happy with what you're doing, but I could have done it better. You know, it's just,
Yeah.
I think there was the one thing
Or
of,
even if you did it very well and they're like, great job, it's
mm,
still it's still a point of like, I can evaluate that you've done.
what,
But
well,
yeah, there's a whole discussion there that we can go down, but you were gonna say
yeah,
something.
yeah. What was I gonna say? No, I lost my train. But just to relate, and then getting back to the part of, and I think that's actually why I think the reason why I suggested the book was the whole. I mean, the title says the character to be disliked, but I think it was unpacked on the, you know, dislike. It's the whole thing of personally, I struggle with that, you know, of always wanting to be good in good standing with people. But I think now more than ever, and in the last couple of months or year or so, I'm starting to realize that that's out of your control. You can do the best as a human being, like not be evil and all that stuff, but you don't need to then seek validation from others to be like you're a good person, you know.
Very
And
stoic of you, Peter.
so I think that section to me was one that I mean, Paul was looking forward to the most. So I mean, it's not like it's something that I didn't know, but it's like, I was like, okay, it's me then trying to be okay with actually being disliked, to understand
Yeah.
that um, it's a them thing, not me. And not in a sense of you're going out of your way to be Again, it says no one aims to be disliked, but understand that regardless, there will be someone that would or does dislike you. And knowing
Yeah.
that and being okay with it, I think, is where then that freedom comes from to be like, no, I'm actually free of what their notion is. I'll just carry on with what I need to do. And I mean, I have a friend who sat me down, I think in December, and it was a matter in the lines of apparently I'm very bad at setting boundaries. Like I'm very, my boundaries are very faint, and she said, she's a psychologist, so but she was like, that's I mean, we've been friends a while, but that's like the first time she ever kind of went, used a profession and,
Yeah.
wasn't happen against us. But again, I understand that. And it talks about that here as well. It's like, that's also an understanding how you separate tasks. To be able to be aware to be like, oh, this is what I do up until this point. From that point onwards, that's actually not. Oh yeah, that's not actually any of my problem. That's for them.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that comes with being able to set in strong boundaries. If it's faint, then you're able to be like, oh, I can cross that, or you can let them cross into your side of things. Being able to be like, again, we use the example of the kid study, and it's like, there's no use a parent sitting in the room studying for the kid. The kid should be
Yeah.
able to be like, no, 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 no. That's something that I need to do. You can come check up on me from time to time to see whether I'm still studying, but you don't have to. It's the same
Yeah.
with
Or you can
micro.
assist, you can provide, and if
Yeah.
the kid wants to ask questions, and you can be like, talk through it and help them
Mm, mm,
like think through things and stuff. That's
mm.
perfectly fine, but don't encroach on their task.
Yeah, I mean, even in the workplace, knowing what your role is important.
Mm.
To be like, up until this point, that's what I need to do. From that point going on, that's not. But again, that's I think also where when that's not clearly defined or it's been left to just run for a while, that's when that breeds sort of trouble because at some point one will decide to fall short of what they need to do, but then because boundaries were not clearly set or it was not the tasks were not properly separated, then
Yeah.
then you actually then start to create those gaps. But yeah, I think there's a lot I can waffle on that. But yeah.
I think also I'm similar, like you were saying a little while back, that you tr- you you prefer to be liked and have sort of comfortable relationships and things like that. And I'm in the same sort of boat. I don't want to cause rifts and things like that, and I will go out of my way to try and repair those. I don't think it's a terrible thing, but I think that the separation of tasks thing is something to, and the courage to be disliked is something that is a helpful thing to remember. To be like, if you truly have done the thing that you believe to be good, and someone chooses to they have the outlook that no, they don't like you because of that or something like that, or they disagree with you, that's okay. Like, you don't have to pretend to be some one or something that you aren't because someone doesn't like you. And if you do find yourself being a, I don't know, like a chameleon, trying to like fit in with everyone and do everything to please everyone, then you haven't done that, like you said, the separation of tasks. But before we run out of time, let's run to the second last one, the fourth night. So where the center of the world is. So I'm going to read from page 160. You said that separating tasks is the point of departure for interpersonal relationships or interpersonal relations. Well, what is the goal of interpersonal relations? And then the philosopher says, to get straight to the heart of the matter, it's community feeling. In 161, when Adler refers to community, he goes beyond the household, school, workplace, and local society. He treats it as all-inclusive, covering not only nations and all of humanity, but the entire axis of time from past to future. He includes plants, animals, and even inanimate objects. Then 162. As I've been saying all along, Adlerian psychology has the view that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. Interpersonal relations are the source of unhappiness, and the opposite can also be said too. Interpersonal relations are the source of happiness. Furthermore, community feeling is the most important index for considering a state of interpersonal relationships that is happy. Then, page 169. In Adlerian psychology, a sense of belonging is something that one can attain only by making an active commitment to the community of one's own accord. And then 170. A sense of belonging is something that one acquires through one's own efforts. It's not something that one is endowed with at birth. So that's the idea that the community is at the center, and that you can't just magically be a part of that. You have to be contributing to that to be a part of it. And then I'm going to read through a bunch of different things on relations as well. So I'll try and skip through them quickly, but there's a few of them. So on 167, how does it connect to building with the kind of relations in which we cooperate and act in harmony with each other? That brings us to the concept of the horizontal relationship. Then 179. One must not praise and one must not rebuke. In the act of praise, there's the aspect of the being passing judgment by one person's ability, basically one person passing judgment on another person, one person who thinks that they have the ability to pass judgment on another person who doesn't have the ability. And then 180. Adlerian psychology refutes all manner of vertical relationships. So again, vertical being like this person's above me or below me, and horizontal being like comrades. They side by side next to each other. So in Adlerian psychology, refutes all manner of vertical relationships and proposes that all interpersonal relationships be horizontal relations. In a sense, this point may be regarded as the fundamental principle in Adlerian psychology. Then 183. This act of intruding on other people's tasks. So we brought up the subject of intervention. This act of intruding on other people's tasks. This is an act of intruding on other people's tasks. Sorry. So why does a person intervene? Here too, in the background, is vertical relations. It is precisely because one perceives interpersonal relations as vertical and sees the other party as beneath one that one intervenes. One is convinced oneself that one is right and the other party is wrong. Of course, the intervention here is manipulation, pure and simple. In 184, that's right. Neither one praises nor rebukes. This kind of assistance, which is based on horizontal relations, is referred to in Adlerian psychology as encouragement. So, if you're doing the horizontal relationships thing right, you are using encouragement. Then 185. When one is not following through with one's tasks, it is not because one is without ability. Adlerian psychology tells us that the issue here is not one of ability, but simply that one has lost the courage to face one's tasks. A little bit further down, the more one is praised by another person, the more one forms the belief that one has no ability. Please do your best to remember this. And then towards the last bit, 187, I say thank you. Oh, sorry, here. So concretely speaking, how does one go about this? One cannot praise, but one cannot rebuke. What other choices are there? And then basically he says that you need to just say thank you, and that's the idea of encouragement. You convey the words of gratitude, saying thank you to the partner who has helped you with your work. You might express straightforward delight, saying, I am glad. That is all, the youth asks. And the philosopher says, yes. And then he also adds, the most important thing is not to judge other people. And then lastly, 189. It's quite simple. It's when one is able to feel, I am beneficial to the community, that one can have a true sense of one's worth. That is the answer that would be offered in Adlerian psychology. So basically when I contribute. So, yeah, there's a bunch of things that we went through there. But I think, to me, the main points are points that we've kind of already touched on, which is just the idea of the community being important, and in order to foster that well, you have to contribute and actively be a part of that, and then to basically, I don't know how to phrase it correctly, I think this is the wrong way of phrasing it, but to basically be recognized in that, one shouldn't give recognition as in positive or negative affirmations of like you did this well or you didn't do this well, but rather one should just be grateful to others, because that, in Adler's view, seemingly is the only way that you can, or it's at least one of the ways, I don't know, maybe he has other ways that aren't mentioned in this book, but it's the only way mentioned in the book where you can give almost like a form of recognition to someone else without passing judgment, is by saying thank you for doing this, or I'm glad you did this, or because it's not a better than or worse than or good or bad.
It's I want to say it's more of the recognition you want to, I don't want to say sick, but the recognition you're getting is from your work speaking for itself type of thing. I don't know if I'm making sense. To be like, again, like you're saying, it's like being acknowledged for work that you've done. You know, it's like, yeah, in that sense, it's like that's what others need to hear, to be like, I'm really glad you did that. You know, or yeah, I'm happy you did that. You, and also not feel like it's not, I know this is poor, but it's not out of obligation, but rather to be like, because I'm part of this, I'm required to do this. I don't know. It's not like it's held
Yeah.
on your neck, what's meant to be like, you, yeah, yeah. It's like out
Yeah,
of self-will.
yeah, it's difficult to, like, I don't know how to phrase it or think about it directly either, but one of the things that kind of came to mind is it's almost like in a relationship or a marriage where you like, the idea is to love the person for who they are, right? But then at the same time, what it there also needs to be in the background, there if that person sort of, I don't know, just becomes a horrible person and is abusive or does drugs and all kinds of things, sure, there might be an element of you still loving that person, but the that that is not that's not a good thing or situation. What you actually want is almost like a balance of loving the person for who they are, but they also should be, in some sense, trying to contribute to
put their
like
best foot
growing
forward.
as a yeah, because if they just are a horrible person, then it's it it's almost strange to just to say, but you almost shouldn't be loving them in the same way. Because you're almost encouraging this terrible thing. To be like, no, it's fine, don't worry, I just love you for the way that you are. But yeah, it's difficult and confusing, and there's lots of complexities there. But I think the community thing is part of it. Like in I don't know, in some sort of strange other world, one might think, well, the community, if I truly should be a part of the community, they should just accept me for who I am. But the reality is that's not how communities work. Communities work by you actually needing to be a part of it. And to be a part of it, you normally the way that you do that is to contribute, whether it's materially or whether it's emotionally, just interacting with people or doing something. It doesn't have to be always like a monetary thing or a work thing. There are those other aspects of the life tasks that one can contribute in. But yeah.
I mean, I think I might be mistaken, but it was also about the whole thing of that every sort of community also has sort of like rules that you sort of have to abide by. You know, so it's. I think it was the whole thing of. I feel like I'm getting this wrong, but I think it did speak of the whole that criminal element to be like, no, because you bad in that way, the community is able to say, we don't want you here anymore. You know, there was a section that kind of you have to be in right standing with community, but anyway,
That makes sense.
which,
I don't remember it, but it makes sense.
but it goes back to what you're saying. It's like, I mean, the reason I brought that up is that whole thing of saying that just because one acts terribly in one way, you know, you don't feel the need to, again, as it would like, yeah, no, it's like, don't feel the need to love them. But again, it's like they will fall out of that community. It's the same with the whole, I don't know if you know, there was that whole steps of, you also don't only exist in one community. You know, it's like you form part of the school community, family community. If you feel like education is not for you, why not? You fall out of that school community. You're no longer part of it. But
Yeah,
then
but
when
there
you,
is the broader, yeah.
yeah, then you know, so I think that was also that whole confusing part where that community is infinite. It includes past, future, inanimate and real objects, etc., etc. But yeah, I think for me, one thing that also stood out to me was also, you know, as they put it, and it was part of there's this podcast I listened to, a psychologist come of how what usually breaks people and makes people turn out the way they are is because they think they're the center of the world. You know, the moment something goes wrong, they believe they're the most important, meaning that everything has to go wrong. You know, and it's just a sad way of living, and you'll be surprised
Yeah.
by how many people live by that. But yeah, I know you have spoken much about what's this, the horizontal and vertical, and I
Yes,
mean,
yeah.
you really wanted to speak about that, which I mean, it's quite interesting, and I mean, it goes. I think it goes back to the whole enemy comrade thing. I mean, you pointed out then that if you kind of see everyone as equals, then it's very easy to live in harmony that way. Just to, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, we are a bit pressed for time, so we can quickly go through the
Yeah.
last chapter.
Cool. Yeah, so that's the fifth night. To live in earnest in the here and now. That's the sort of title of the fifth night. And I'll do the same thing as usual, read through a bunch of snippets. So starting on 204, the final goal of these interpersonal relationships is community feeling. Then 209, it's about community feeling after all. Concretely speaking, it's making the switch from attachment to self-interest, to concern for others, social interest, and gaining the sense of community feeling. Three things are needed at this point: self-acceptance, self-acceptance, confidence in others, and contribution to others. Then on 222. Self-acceptance, accepting one's irreplaceable, this is me, just as it is. And then confidence in others is to place unconditional confidence at the base of one's interpersonal relations, rather than seeding doubt. Yeah, those things can get complicated, and we can discuss them at some point. But then, just jumping forward to 225. It is even said that to truly understand Adlerian psychology and apply it to actually changing one's way of living, one needs half the number of years that one has lived. In other words, if you were starting to study at the age of 40, you would need to take another 20 years, that is, until you turn 60, to understand it. I think that rings true for some of the stuff for me. And then jumping further to page 234. For a human being, the greatest unhappiness is not being able to like oneself. Adler came up with an extremely simple answer to address this reality, namely that of the feeling of, am I beneficial to the community, or am I of use to someone, is the only thing that can give one true awareness of whether one has worth. And then 235, all we need is this subjective sense that I am of use to someone, or in other words, a feeling of contribution. Do you see it now? In a word, happiness is the feeling of contribution. That is the definition of happiness. Then page 236. But I'm sure that the reason people seek recognition is clear to you now. People want to like themselves. They want to feel that they have worth. In order to feel that, they want the feeling of contribution that tells them, I am of use to someone. And they seek that recognition, just reminding us that recognition is a bad term in Adler's vocabulary. And they seek that recognition from others as an easy means of gaining the feeling of contribution. Then 237, if one really has the feeling of contribution, one will no longer have any need for recognition from others, because one will already have the real awareness that I am of use to someone. In other words, a person who is obsessed with the desire for recognition does not have any community feeling yet, and has not managed to engage in self-acceptance, confidence in others, or contribution to others. And then he sort of rounds this little part out. The philosopher's points could be summed up as follows. People can only be truly aware of their worth when they are able to feel I am of use to someone. However, it doesn't matter if the contribution one makes at such a time is without any visible form. It is enough to have the subjective sense of being of use to someone, that is to say, the feeling of contribution. And then the philosopher arrives at the following conclusion: happiness is the feeling of contribution. Then I'm going to jump to the last few snippets, starting from 255. He says, yeah, the lifestyle that Adler is advocating for is a kind of story. Lifestyle is about here and now, and something that one can change. Lifestyle is about here and now, and is something that one can change of one's own volition. Then 258. The greatest life lie of all is not to live in the here and now. It is to look at the past and the future and cast dim light on one's entire life and believe that one has been able to see something. You have turned away from the here and now. So cast away the life lie and fearlessly shine a bright spotlight on the here and now. That's something you can do. And then a little bit further on page 259. What is the meaning of life? When someone posed these questions to Adler, this was his answer: life in general has no meaning. And then a bit later he says, and Adler, having stated that life in general has no meaning, he then continues, whatever meaning life has must be assigned by the individual. And then 262. No matter what moments you are living, or if there are people who dislike you, as long as you do not lose sight of the guiding star of I contribute to others, you will not lose your way, and you can do whatever you like. Whether you are disliked or not, you pay no mind and live free. And then lastly, on 264. One more time, I give you the words of Adler. Someone has to start. Other people might not be cooperative, but that's not connected to you. My advice is this: you should start, with no regard to whether others are cooperative or not. Yeah. Live in the here and now. I don't know what your thoughts are for the last bit.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Like I said, I didn't get much through that last chapter, but I tried to follow as much as you did. But yeah, it's the whole happiness coming from contribution thing.
Yeah.
Is interesting. And again, like I said, making it known that it's not for recognition, but rather just you saying, this is my task towards other people. And
Yeah.
I mean, it spoke about lifestyle again, to be like, you make that choice, and at any given point, you can change that. I think that's very, very important. That's really the driving force, like knowing that you have the power to change the course of things, I think is, important. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's interesting to also think of how, to kind of disassociate from drive coming from others. Again, like we said, with the whole praise and rebuke thing, you kind of living for other people and not for yourself. It's more of remain true to yourself. Again, in the confines of what's right and wrong, but just embark on things. And again, like at the end, it's like just start. You don't have to, give excuses for it. As excuses has been the word that's been, carrying. And I mean, takes me back to, again, like I said on Sunday, which now that I think is very closely related to the whole, it was called Humbly Seven, which, I mean, Humbly Seven is you're doing things not for yourself but for others.
Yeah.
I mean, there were aspects of the whole superiority complex or thing of how you hold back from letting other people do things because you do better at it. But it's like, how are those people, and it goes back to how you're saying there's a healthy way of inferiority, how others get better if you actually don't give them the chance to actually do those things. They have to do it themselves over and over, like you've done it over and over to become great at it. And say thank you and not, judge their work.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's a difficult one.
yeah, it is, but it has to be done. How else do you think they'll get at your level? And again, it goes back to, that's also what's discouraging for people. The more you praise them, the more they're like, nah, I actually don't want to do that because I'm just getting marked for what needs to be done, you know. But yeah, I think the reason why I said that was actually in connection to the last bit we read about just starting and doing it. Was like, we're saying the question that was posed on Sunday was like, what is it that keeps you away from, let's say, serving like a church or in any aspect? And most people, like, we usually look at ourselves like, oh, I'm still such a sinner. I can't, be found in front, helping out at church. It's like, but then next week you're further away. The only way to sort of come back is to drop that and just start somewhere, and kind
Yeah.
of walk back. But yeah, just start.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea of happiness being almost the same thing or being defined by contribution,
Mm.
and then trying to disassociate contribution with recognition, because they are, and I think it's something that I struggle with. Yeah, it's to really just do things for their own sake, and it becomes really complicated as well because, like, the reason why we value things is because other people value things. If other people didn't value them, and I don't think that's a terrible thing. I think that can be a good thing. So it's what makes a book like this confusing, because the book has very definitive, like, it's like this and like this and like this, and I don't view the lines as clearly as that. But at the same time, I think it's really, a lot of the ideas are extremely helpful, and I like these kind of books, because they get you to think and be like, hey, how does that, I don't know if I agree with that. Why is this? Why would you say it like that? And then there's some things where you start to realize how they defining words or doing things, and that makes more sense of why the phrasing that they've gone with makes sense, and that. But yeah, it's there's a lot of interesting lessons, and I think it's very valuable to say, how can I go through the contribution, or get to the point where I can start with contributing in a way that's not tied to rewards or recognition from others. But all of that being said, at the same time, that it should still be contributing in some way to community or to someone, because even one-to-one, as Adler seemingly puts it, is also a form of community. Yeah.
I mean, that's the smallest part of community, you and I. So
Yeah, exactly.
cool.
So, any last thoughts, Peter, before we close off?
No, as usual, grab a copy if you can. Good read. I mean, I I feel like for this year, this is the best read for me. Yeah, I keep telling my friend, like, this is probably the first book to recommend for people for this year. But yeah, no, I mean, I haven't. Okay, I'll be lying and say, but yeah, I just it's been a very interesting read. Like I think for
Yeah.
myself, like I said, there were many parts where I saw myself in them, and again, like I said, I was captivated by the title because of who I see myself to be, and I was like, I actually need to read the book, and yeah, it wasn't disappointing, to say the least, and yeah, I did thoroughly enjoy it, and yeah, would actually recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's also, I like the dialogue format because it's different from what we're used to. But yeah, I think it was a good read, and there's lots of good reminders and lots of different ways of thinking about things, which I think are helpful. Helpful framings, like the idea of rather than focusing on the past, focus on how you are gonna move forward with what you have at the moment and things like that. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, James.
We'll chat again next time.
Cool.